Hi, welcome back everyone. What you're seeing on the screen, if you're coming to my channel for a repeat visit, should be familiar to you. This is actually the Earth's grid network as it exists in a close-up view of what we've been viewing from the Earth spectrum. Kind of zoomed in on the United States to give us a closer look today. And of course, the art of war, which I mentioned in my last video, which went into the topic of Q a little bit, and the V as in Victor, as in V for Vendetta, steganography that surrounds it. And that's kind of where we're going to pick up and keep going today. We're going to talk about how the art of war plays into that, the memetics and mind control, as we've been exploring around that V steganography. The DC Parasite network that exists with this graphic as is coming out in some video games. And as you can see, Washington, D.C., not an actual node on here, but as we're calling it, the Parasite network, for it to jack in and steal energy from these nodes. Again, if any of these topics are going to be somewhat confusing to you, I definitely recommend going back to my previous work on this stuff. I'll link it in the description. But what I also didn't do well enough in my last video was kind of talk through the Q phenomenon to the degree that I could have. So we're going to go back through the gunpowder plot I mentioned last time, and of course the Q proofs, because what I showed last time was JFK Jr., which of course Q itself, himself, herself, said was a false meme anyway. But my whole point was not construed very well, because I don't think I got across that any of these proofs can be disproven with the logic that I'll lay out. But before we get into that, it's real important that we kind of lay the groundwork again. This channel is all about steganography, picking apart secret data hidden in non-secret ordinary messages. And of course, we're utilizing archaeology, systematic study of our past and our culture, alongside theosophy, which is something we'll also get into later, where we're trying to find our human potential through these studies to figure out what's been hijacked and how memes and memes have been keeping things out of phase. So all of this gets done through our popular media, as we've discussed. Richard Dawkins talks about the concept of the meme in his book, The Selfish Gene, in 1876. And of course, the memetics as a theory of science of information viruses. So we implant certain proselytizing views into the minds of men. This is just a primer to get us caught back up here. I want to introduce another book that bounces off the same topics by Aaron Lynch. And he wrote a book called The Thought Contagion in the 90s, which really goes into how belief spreads through society. So how memes turn into belief. It takes Richard Dawkins' work one step further and kind of gets into uncovering what it is that beliefs are all built around. And that's kind of what we have here with the Q movement, and why we have to be careful. So on this thought of the thought contagion, we're going to go back to the art of war. Keep in mind, we're still talking about the Jesuits in this context. And as I suggested, that through examining the gunpowder plot in the 17th century, interestingly enough, for this, which is the original false flag, and how the Jesuits used this event for their advantage to sneak in the Catholics. And of course, by virtue of that, the Catholics get in, but then so do all the Jesuits, who are rulers from the shadows. Okay? What we didn't get into was some of their chapters and the 13 tenets at which they go by the art of war. But I want to draw attention specifically to chapter 5, as it's our V steganography chapter, and notice curiously how it's the manipulation of energy in chapter 5. The art of war, of course, being the companion to the Jesuit handbook, which is the Ignatius Way, which we looked into last time. So the first couple lines here says, Sun Tzu, the presumed author of this, said, "The control of a large force is the same in principle as the control of a few men. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers. Fighting with a large army under your command is no wise different from fighting with a small one. It is merely a question of instituting signs and signals." It says signs and signals. So remember, this is what we're talking about, is steganography. Hiding signs and signals under, basically plain sight. They're telling you what they're doing, manipulating energy. the energy network, right? Hacking in with the DC Parasite network. So by using those signs and signals, we go to the next page. And here we find some more curious things along the lines of the 5 in the V steganography. There are not more than 5 musical notes, he writes in line 7, yet the combination of these 5 give rise to more melodies than can ever be heard. There are not more than 5 primary colors, yet in combination, they produce more hues than can ever be seen. There are not more than 5 cardinal tastes, yet combinations of them yield more flavors than can ever be tasted. Now think about what he's saying there, guys. He's calling attention to the primary colors, the musical notes, the cardinal tastes. He's calling attention to our senses. And if you're reading into what the first couple lines coupled with that are getting at when he's saying to control a large force, a large population, is the same principle as to control a few men, manipulate the energy harmonic fields. I wonder what that gets at. Well, I've got some suppositions about that anyway, right? We're talking about the mind control, we're talking about the steganography, we're talking about V and Q. So I simply suspect that by using the methodologies from chapter 5 of this chapter, those that are the best at the mind control, the Jesuits, have been implementing this stuff for years, under the guise of somebody, by the way. There's somebody at the top of that structure that maybe we can make some suppositions about by the end of this video. Of course, no outright claims, because nothing I'm referencing in this video is completely put together. I'm only putting puzzle pieces into view as we go, of course. But kind of back to the point, the 5 senses, as it relates to the olfactory, the taste, the sight, the sound, and the feeling, which is the emotion. Not the feeling, touch feeling, but the emotion feeling. And that's the key to hijacking the number 5 and of course, the 5 senses, the number of man, as we talked about in Atlantis, in the Coming Ice Age, and as Frank Joseph was talking about what the number 5 actually represents. And that makes sense, right? We have 5 senses, we have 5 fingers, we have 5 toes. This is definitely kind of the round control number of man. And so whenever you find the V, maybe associated with the Q now, as we're going to find out, you might want to be cautious. And that's really all I'm getting at with the Q stuff. And now we're going to come back to these proofs, of course, because like I said, I'm not trying to stoke any emotional anger or ire in anybody by claiming that Q is false. Again, people feel really, really strongly about Q because it did enlighten some stuff that is now apparent to us in the pedophilia networks that our political regime has been a part of for years and years. But I'm going to argue that they are just the middle management. And what Q was, actually, it was a distraction away from what they actually, and they being the wizards, the ones at the top, the maybe alien spiritual control grid, Lucifer, let's call the network, as that energy, that entity might want to subjugate, Q may have been a distraction. And so while the things that have come out of Q would indicate, none of these proofs are going to be something that can't be explained away by a supposition that a highly coordinated effort, even above and beyond any sovereign government that the world may have, and we're talking, of course, more specifically to a wider array network of control that the world has, not this squabbling, pissant, political regime that we have that's causing divisiveness, but what they're also trying to enhance with the 5G network to really solidify this stuff in. And Q is kind of a preamble to this to get, I think, further political divide stoked in the public. And the reason I'm saying this is because we're going to discover in the end of the video that through the course of gematria and some things relating to steganography in plain sight in the news, how this it's possible anyway, and the opinion that I favor is that Q was a very well orchestrated event, just like any common sports game, where Vegas knows the answer to the riddle before the bets are put in place. We're going to go into some work that shows that. We're going to come back around to that. But first and foremost, it doesn't matter how many of these things you go through, because it's all written around timestamps. Okay, so really all I'm talking about is you can get really creative with putting things in plain sight, and make the perception very apparent that there isn't a coincidence with any of this stuff. But if you are the one that controls both the network and the message that's being sent through this, you can control the entire narrative through the emotional stoking of the public. And that's what I suspect Q had done in the first place. And I got caught up in it again, I'll admit. But the most apparent thing to me as to why this was some sort of a psyop relating to the V steganography and the V for Vendetta is that the lack of apophasis being used as a tactic to truly divert attention away from the matter was very curious to me. It's almost as if the mainstream media wanted you to know about this. And you might say, they mentioned in articles that they were trying to discredit Q, and they were trying to directly attack Q. And you're right, and that's my point. They directly attacked Q. If they truly didn't want Q to seep in as a common meme, they would have never released those articles like they did. The ones in the big popular New York Times, because they wanted to stoke the belief contagion, the thought contagion. They wanted it to spread. That's why they attacked it. If they didn't, they would have Glomar responsed it, right? Which is kind of the we cannot confirm nor deny that this happened type of a deal, but even more subtly with the use with apophasis. And so what this basically is it's an employment to raise an otherwise controversial attack while disclaiming responsibility for it. And a really, really classic example would be to turn a dismissive eye to such things like the UFO agenda as sci-fi. This is what they do, right? Oh, okay, well, the UFO stuff has been there for 60 years, and it's now just getting to the surface because all of that time, they're not outwardly decrying it. They're not running propaganda pieces against it. They're actually running apophasis against the whole thing to disambiguate it and call everything basically sci-fi world, right? It's a very passive-aggressive tactic that you can use. Another example that they use, when Ronald Reagan, when he was the age 73, people were talking about how the scrutiny of his age. He said, "I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience." You see how he didn't mention at all the specificity of his age? He diverted away and talked only about his opponent's youth and his own inexperience. This did not happen with Q. The mainstream media took to Q and kind of pumped its notoriety because of the fact that they were not using apophasis. They were more directly using some more critical thinking vehicles against you. And of course, if it's connected to the Jesuits in any way, through the art of war, which, because Q being the potential military operation that it is, Chapter 13, the use of spies, relating back to the 13 months in the Roman calendar and all sorts of other things, this is basically the doctrine of the Jesuits, ruling from the shadows, inciting apophasis to direct attention away from them. Again, they didn't do that with Q. Just like with the gunpowder plot in V, they drew all the attention to it. So they invaded, the Catholics invaded after that. So what kind of invasion are we going to expect through them implementing the art of war? Because I think that's exactly what they've done with Q, is they've opened the door. Take a second to think about what the implication of what I'm laying out there is. The connection to the gunpowder plot, the invasion that we're about to withstand, the connection is that the gunpowder plot being a false flag, they wanted to draw the attention to it, and they gladly sacrificed 8 Jesuits in trial who had no idea the part they were playing in the sacrifice, just to make sure that the Jesuits could sneak into the country, become a better spy. This is kind of what we're experiencing with Q, guys. I mean, think about it. You've got the politicians, the eight Chan boards, kind of symbolic of the 8 Jesuits, where the politicians that are being prosecuted or publicly humiliated, maybe through these boards, or publicly found out to be what they are, they're being gladly shown a light on through the powers that be that control them, so they can divert attention away from what's really going on. It's pretty apparent to me anyway that after thinking about all the logical fallacies and cognitive biases that were committed through all of it, that yeah, it's absolutely, I'm more than convinced that the tie to what we're going to find in Zach Hubbard's work with the gematria, how the timestamps are all manipulated, and how that's all the Q proofs really are, kind of boils into this. But we have a tendency to, I'm just going to go through these real quick. What was being committed in terms of the cognitive biases, the groupthink, becoming an Anon, letting your social dynamics of your group situation override the best outcomes, because people will get caught up in just the crusade of finding the truth, and then that goes along with that, the in-group bias, where you unfairly favor those who belong to your group, creating political division. And this is what happened with the split of the far right, far left with the Q movement. The just world hypothesis, where your preference for a just world makes you presume that it exists, which Q gave us. I think Q gave us a false version of what what reality could be with these arrests. And think about it, that the judges were going to come out and unveil all of these unsealed documents and things that never happened, that people might argue could still happen. And I do think these people are being seen for what they are, but I see more of them being killed than being prosecuted. You know what I mean? So the negativity bias is next, where you allow your negative things to disappropriately influence your thinking. And this is to say the emotional aspect of thinking about something like pedophilia is going to rank very high on the emotional spectrum of somebody. The fundamental attribution error, where you judge others based on their character, but yourself on the situation. So I'm an Anon, I'm finding the truth. You're judging me for trying to find the truth. How dare you? You must be blank, right? Insert slur there. I mean, they came up with plenty of the memes and damaging things to propagate from there on in. I think a lot of you that come to this channel might agree that a lot of the Q community was quite caustic with how vile they were and all that. So interestingly enough, everybody that followed Q also attributed the halo effect to Q, where no matter how much you like somebody or how attractive they are, it influences your judgment of them. And this is because, of course, Q became this benevolent dictator type thing, where we're inflicting the optimism bias, where we overestimate the likelihood of the outcomes that are going to be good and frame it in a way that's influenced by the context and delivery. Because of Q writing everything down in the military jargon that he did, we presumed, and I'll say that they did, he did, she did, it did, whatever he was, we presumed it was a repeat of kind of the 1776 pamphlets that went around with the stoking of the revolution, which, of course, that meme is, the 1776 meme is all wrapped up in Q too. Of course, the sunk cost fallacy you have no choice but to commit that, where you irrationally cling to things that have already cost you something. In this case, time, the research, and researching the puzzle for the Q boards and the research forums and the 8chan boards. Confirmation bias that favors the things that confirm your existing beliefs. So already it's already hijacked your emotion. Now it's going to hijack your spirituality and make sure that everything is looked at as basically a blasphemy, essentially, is what it was. And then Q went after the belief bias. Has a conclusion that supports your existing beliefs. You'll rationalize anything that supports it. It kind of goes along with the confirmation bias. The backfire effect. When your core beliefs are challenged, it can cause you to believe them even more strongly. And this happens when really strong arguments get put towards somebody, and they have no choice but to basically shoot themselves because, of course, their brains misfire. It's too logical of an argument, right? Kind of as we're going through right now, as I'm showing you how many logical or cognitive biases pre-exist with Q. And the Barnum effect, lastly, was where you see personal specifics and vague statements by filling in the gaps. And this is, of course, how all the acronyms factor in, the vague statements that are made with Q. So many vague statements left open-ended that the narrative can go anywhere. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure novel in some context, depending on how the news progresses, how people think about it presciently. Q, whoever it was, could simply tune with a timestamp that matches up something that matches previous language. right? Maybe it never manifests. But that's one of the curious things about it. Behind it, here are the logical fallacies that are being committed. Ambiguity, using double meanings or ambiguities of language to mislead or misrepresent the truth. This happens with like the D5 avalanche or the D5, you know, it ends up all over the language with Q, and you can quite literally look at it. And then the genetic fallacy, we're judging something good or bad on the bias of where it comes from or from who it comes from. Q claims to be next to the president. The Q++ thing hooked up with the tweets. Of course, I think it's all connected. I think it's a puppeteer. I think it's more of a Wizard of Oz scenario than we think the military is involved in this, of course. And they could just be a puppet in the scenario, right? The black or white fallacy, or two alternative states are presented as the only possibilities, when in fact more possibilities exist. The Democrats versus the Republicans again, right? The bandwagon effect of the Anons getting on board. The more the numbers ticked up, the more it happened. Appeal to emotion, false cause, special pleading, moving the goalpost to create exceptions when a claim is shown to be false. When things wouldn't happen, Q always had an explanation for it, right? Things didn't happen as they would predict. Oh, well, we had to move the goalposts. Thing you don't understand. We had, you know, situations occur. We had to adjust on the fly. We had to call an audible, basically. You heard Q say that all the time. And then finally, the tu quoque, avoiding having to engage with criticism by turning it back on the accuser, answering criticism with criticism. So these are all the things that happened with Q, guys. And pretty curious, right? Like, I know I use that term a lot. I got to find a better term than curious, but I think you see what I'm getting at here. So at this point in the video, we've got a couple things to review. We've gone deeper into the V analysis. We've talked about how the timestamps on the Q posts, the Q proofs as they were, no matter if they're related to JFK Jr. or not, it doesn't matter. It's all based on an implication that who controls all the puppet strings, whatever type of wizard does, also controls narratives here through the art of war, through the manipulation of energy, the number of man, the V steganography as it relates to Q. That's going to get pretty deep here in a second, guys. But before we get there, I really want to show you guys some tarot cards here. Whoops. Sorry, I just dropped them. All right. So this is going to be a good exercise because I pulled out the V steganography along with the 17 as it relates, because Q being the 17th letter in the alphabet. But piggybacking off of these concepts, the 5 is something that becomes a really interesting card in terms of what they're hiding in plain sight in the they through the Hierophant. And we have symbology of a Catholic priesthood with a lamb on his lap. We're going to come back to that in the keys being crossed. But the 5 is a very Roman type of symbology here in the tarot deck. And the lamb is going to factor in with the V steganography in a way that you'll see in a second, and why it being on the lap in this submissive position is also kind of symbolic of us being in the lap of Rome. And unduly, you know, kind of too trusting of the scenario. Some very nefarious stuff going on here with us just sitting there. And then, of course, the star, number 17, as it relates to illumination of certain items. And this is what Q promised, the transition. And of course, Q is very symbolic of a transition too, which is, I think, why the tarot spell kind of associates with the number 17 here, because what the plan is certainly to transition onto something else. What that something else is, I don't know. But I'm gonna actually read what the Hierophant card here symbolizes. The themes and concept are organizations and institutions, spiritual authority, memory, traditional teachings, convention, revelation of the sacred, knowledge and book learning, a teacher, priesthood, history and learning from the past, learning from the experience of others. So think about it. If you can hijack V and the power of V and all of these things relating to this tarot, you can hijack all of these tendencies in people too. And of course, rule with the spiritual authority, turn it upside down. Millennia have passed, and the lives of many men and women have come and gone, and in their place they left history. And in that history they left a treasure house of wisdom, experience, knowledge, and teachings. It is from this collective storehouse of past wisdom and knowledge that tradition arises, and the most effective means by which these traditions might be taught and accessed. Organizations, institutions. Such things were originally intended as a safe and stable environment for the passing on of the tradition and the wisdom contained therein. When you step into my church, wisdom seeker, you step into rich tradition upon which it is built. When you seek knowledge from me, you also make your rightful place in the long line of all those who are the knowledge-hungry acolytes and neophytes. I'm the messenger of that great and noble wisdom that millions seek, and which is offered to them every moment by which they have taken on the mantle of the Hierophant, revealer of the sacred. And that's again what we're talking about here, guys, with the V. There's something very deep, something very ancient, something very secret about the ancient structures that are built on these ley lines. So we're going to find out here in a second. And the key to unlocking the matrix is the ley line, just like the keys in the Hierophant's card, right? So anyway, that's the 5. The 17 then, as it relates to Q, is the star. And the healing and the renewal and rejuvenation, peace and harmony, the new age, the bringing in of the new age, whatever it might be, Leo or Aquarius. An interest in alternative therapy and spirituality, fame and fortune, a guiding light, soothing after suffering, finding the way, hope, nothing is possible. No, or nothing is impossible, I should say. Great luck and light in the darkness. What was Q always about? Light to dark, light to dark. So I think what was happening was this is where the potential energy is, guys. Look at all of the guiding principles of the stars in the sky. Think about even the Star of Bethlehem symbology here, which it stokes. Our Earth is energetically receiving something into its ley line matrix, as you're going to find here on the Maggie's Holistics page, where they've got actually mapping of a monolithic project or monoliths project on the ley lines going on. But through the natural light to darkness that we were about to find out just naturally, Q hijacking through V, it being the same steganography, that's what we're going to find out here in a sec, hijacks these energies. So we have to be really, really careful about where we're going with Q. And that brings us back to 8chan, guys. Okay? That brings us back to 8chan. Get situated here. We're going to get back into V for Vendetta in a sec. But 8chan is something that we've been mentioning here. The eight Jesuits that died in the gunpowder plot. V for Vendetta. Remember the 5th of November. V steganography, number 5 in November. That's gonna factor in here in a sec as well. But something else comes out at me with 8chan. And that's going to be something we're gonna save for after we look into V for Vendetta. But the last thing on the Q, guys, that I want everybody to see kind of with imagery is that just like in V for Vendetta, through all of those misdirection tactics that we looked at with the critical thinking cards that I was laying down there, V used, if anybody's seen the movie or read the book, the similar tactics on the captive here. I forgot the woman's name. I think she becomes nameless anyway by the end of the book, so it doesn't matter. But the situation is thus. She was put into captivity. V did not know how to trust her. And the equivalent of getting Q drops to her through a rat hole every single night gave her this false hope that there was this narrative of another person who had this tremendous story, and seeing how basically justice could be done through learning about this woman's story and learning how she gained strength, and that just by getting these drops, by getting these notes, she was gaining strength to get through the emotional struggles of being a captive herself and starving away, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason this is important is because what this basically depicts is the Stockholm Syndrome. And what committing all those logical fallacies all at once tends to lead to is a situation just like this, where we can tend to become prisoners to the Q drops that are happening in front of us because we're just taking them as utter fact. This all ended up playing out to be a ruse in the end. When she escaped the prison cell, it was just a trial. It was a crucible that V had put onto her, kind of a cruel one, to maintain that she was going to be trustworthy. But again, that's kind of where this all leads back, guys. It's I again present to you that apophasis was not used with the Q narrative, meaning something, they wanted to point to something. The 8 then reminds us of something else, something we haven't talked about yet, and that's the 8th sphere. Okay? And the 8th sphere is gonna relate back to the Earth control group. Here we go. And its emphasis on how a mechanism that's beyond our perception might be influencing us more than we think. And of course, we've already talked about the temples and how the receiving of those mechanisms might be put into place. But the theosophist Rudolf Steiner really builds on the work of an older theosophist, H.P. Blavatsky, in the 1800s with the concept of the 8th sphere. And I'm going to link this because it's much too lengthy to go through in its entirety here. But the main point around the 8th sphere is that we've got 7 different evolutionary cycles that we go through as humanity. They can be represented, on the chakra system with the twin snakes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And these are all different seals, the 7 different seals in the book of Revelation from John the Baptist. But what's happened is there's a frequency that's hijacked the 4th resonance, where we're at now, the Christ consciousness. There's a reason why we're trying to attain Christ consciousness. We're in the Merkaba. This is what Jesus taught us, is that we're trying to master that consciousness right now, mastering the love, the heart chakra, right? What lies beyond that is something for our making, if we can ever get to the ascendant level of the 5, Jupiter. The 5 being hijacked, right? Jupiter's going to come into play here in a sec. But most importantly, the very terminology that's being used with the 8th sphere is that it's the realm that Lucifer and another character by the name of Ahriman have made for humanity to swim in the harmonic soup of. It's a hijacked atmosphere, it's a hijacked material environment, and through the hijacking of our minds, and the discriminative clairvoyance is possessed by very few in the 8th sphere. They have imaginations that constitutes the essential nature of Earth evolution. That is to say, the 4th sphere is not present in the 8th sphere. The essential nature of the 4th sphere is constituted as blah, blah, blah. What he's essentially, I'm going to break this apart because I'm realizing this is kind of just jargon to people. What Rudolf Steiner here is saying is that people possess a discriminative clairvoyance quality that will get us to Christ consciousness. That is being hijacked through use of imaginations, memes, magnetic mind manipulation, control, and occult sciences that are being put out of view as something that are bad instead of something that are good, that makes us not want to look into the spiritual movements that are behind the occult sciences, that actually Jesus Christ himself went and studied in Egypt, in India, in Iran. So we get, and again, Edgar Casey's stuff goes into all that. We're going to do that in the future. But we're getting back, everyone, to the steganography that exists in the world, and how potentially this very 8 heavy steganography that we see with certain things as it relates has to do with this 8th sphere and the sphere of influence that Lucifer still has on us to this day, using harmonics, using the temple structures, using the Babylon system and money printing. What it goes down here basically to say is that when clairvoyance in all kinds of different forms develop in naive, credulous, superstitious people, it is often the case that their free will has been sacrificed. Then Lucifer instantly seizes hold of it, and whereas these people imagine they have had an experience of immortality, the truth is that in their visions they see a part or product of their souls being wrested away and prepared for the 8th sphere. You can imagine from this how deep was the concern of those who, having compromised by agreeing that by way of the mediumship all kinds of truths relating to the spiritual world should be given to the public, then found the mediums believing that the dead were speaking to them. But the occultists then knew that what takes place between mediums and living men is that the stream of free will is passing into the 8th sphere. Lucifer and Ahriman may say human beings long to know something about the life between life and death and rebirth, and so they've hijacked this too. Now, essentially, I'm gonna repeat. This is to say that Lucifer is a very real being who's seized control of something called the eighth sphere that encapsulates around our Earth and Moon, and then the Moon, which actually orbits us in a figure-8 pattern. If you were to track the Moon throughout the sky, it would orbit in a figure-8 pattern throughout the day. To keep time as a contingent on all of this. And it turns us into naive, credulous, superstitious people. How do you explain the Q movement but naive, credulous, superstitious? I'm sorry. I mean, that's how I acted too. So I'm not calling anybody out for it. That's exactly how I was at the beginning. But it is often the case that their free will has been sacrificed. So our free will is sacrificed through that very process. 8chan very well could have been the DC Parasite network communication bridge in play. And again, I think that's what I currently favor. So remember that they know the frequency of a person because of the Merkaba. And so if the Merkaba is the fourth frequency in our evolutionary strand, well, then they hijack that shape as it relates to the Earth grid, as it mimics it. And they're able to take frequency control over everything. Of course, if we go back to even the, that's for just a second, the 8chan meme, the Merkaba anti-Semitism frequency that they enlisted on everybody, and what seemed to dominate the boards was these anti-Semitic themes. So I'm going to leave that there, and what I'm gonna transition into is more of an astrological look into things. This is going to be something that book called Cycles by Dewey and Dakin, which forgetting the two names because I always refer to them as Dewey and Dakin. Those are their last names anyway. But this was a study that was commissioned back in the Great Depression era, 1930, as you can see. The magnetic activity of the Earth was plotted for the first time to try and actually figure out what was going on with economic cycles, which was actually the true reason why the commission was started by President Hoover. But what they did find out was that just like you might infer from an ancient astrologer, things differ. The magnetic energy of things differs from various points in time as well. And so as these dips and fluxes in energy, as we've talked about with the sun, and right now we're getting a ton of solar forcing, causing a ton of magnetic potential forcing into the Earth, but also a weakened magnetosphere. So we're getting blasted with stuff we don't necessarily want to. Our bodies are going through this magnetic cycle as well. And when timed with things that they know are also going to happen on a circadian rhythm, no matter what, behaviors can be mapped with these broad overarching cycles with economies. Those that control the money, the priesthood, the ones that rule the grid by the temple structures, well, they capture this magnetic energy and funnel it toward us in a way that translates it however they would like. And they can amplify the memes, therefore, right? This is what I'm supposing is happening right now. Taking that concept a little bit further, I want you guys to divert your attention over to another key astrological event that's happening on our fabled 5th of November this coming year. Jupiter is transiting into the Sagittarius zodiac sign. And it happens on 5:55 p.m. Or excuse me, it happened at 5:55 p.m. on April 22nd because it went retrograde. I wanted to point out the 5:55. So what happened with Jupiter is it went into Sagittarius for just a minute earlier in the year, then went back retrograde into Scorpio, the scorpion's tail, as it were, the poisonous time, and then is going back into Sagittarius on November 5th. So it's an auspicious, opportunity-filled time for the planet Jupiter energy. And if we go back to the 8th sphere, you'll notice Jupiter is the 5, is the ascendant for us to go to on our next journey for our path, right? So in order to get there, we have to master the Christ consciousness, which is what Jesus' teachings are really all about, and mastering the occult sciences, which is all of God's knowledge, and reappropriating it for ourselves so we can take it back. The V Steganography, right? But it's very interesting, guys, that Jupiter, that auspicious planet, which is one of the benefic planets, the beneficial ones, along with Mercury and Venus, this is right on the 5th of November, as it's timing up with all of these things happening this year. We're talking about the gunpowder plot. Q is no longer with us for some reason, ready for some invasion, like I'm getting at, right? This is just something for you to keep in mind. I'm going to link this one as well. But even further to that, the 5 Steganography extends to one of the other benefic planets, Venus. And what you're looking at here is actually the helical pattern that Venus takes through our sky from our perspective relative to the sun. And as you'll notice, it creates a perfect pentagram. And why this is interesting is because Jesus and Venus have been compared to one another. The V Steganography, the truth, the morning star, as Jesus was called, right? So here's what the reference is to Jesus as the morning star. When Venus rises, it means the sun will follow very soon. In a morning, usually within an hour or two, sometimes just a matter of minutes. Christ's coming. On a long dark night, the appearance of the morning star means daybreak is imminent. In the long dark night of suffering on earth, Jesus being seen as the morning star means the eternal morning is about to dawn. Hence, Christ as the morning star is a picture of great promise and hope. Lucifer was a creature of beauty and power. Christ is God, the Creator, beautiful and powerful beyond measure, the one Lucifer rebelled against. But the name morning star is not tainted. It is Satan who is tainted. I want you to remember that. It's not the morning star who's tainted, it's Satan who's tainted. And that means that the pentagram is not tainted. The pentagram is actually a holy symbol that Satan turned upside down. Lucifer turned upside down. The V got turned upside down. Because remember what I was talking about in my last video is that the V was also something that looked like another Greek symbol, and of course I identified it as the LAMBDA. I forgot what it was called, but in between making these videos, I did go back to that. I want you guys to take a look. Venus is up here, the 6th beyond Jupiter, almost pulling us through. So if Jesus manifested as a Venus symbol, Venus was a captured planet as well. The curious thing about Venus is that, like Cliff High supposes, it was a captured planet. It created naturally then that pentagonal helical pattern. Venus is the only planet that spins the opposite way. I don't know when it came in. It's going to be a further investigation. But as you also know, it's the most dense manifestation is Saturn. And this is truly where the Satan-Lucifer riddle comes in, because STN, in terms of the consonants here, somehow relate to this 8th sphere. And STN relates to Saturn, Satan, their festival in ancient Rome, Saturnalia. Saturnalia was on the 17th of December, of course, which relates to Q. But if we're looking at Saturn's interesting too, because Saturn has rings, and Saturn also has a hexagonal polarity vortex. And this is going to be something we investigate in further videos, but of course the buckyball is hexagonal and pentagonal. So what is the energy that is represented by Saturn? Satan, the 6? Not really sure. But the Florida Maquis just did a video too that I'll plug him again for, where he's finding the number 6 as a Roman numeral down in the snow in Antarctica. Yeah, there we go. Just took a second to pop up. see right here on the Florida Maquis video, at about 5 minutes and 22 seconds in, he's finding on the Antarctic surface something emblazoned or etched, maybe is a better word for it, in the VI6 steganography. So different from 5, which I think, of course, relates to Venus. The 5 petals of Venus, Jesus and the morning star, and the representation of that symbolism. And I think 6 relates to, of course, Saturn, and its hexagonal, 6-sided frequencies. And I'll just show you guys again, the buckyball formation. Got a 6 and 5-sided structure. So we'll keep uncovering what that is, telling us and kind of what that's all about. In a later video, I'm also going to explore what the rings of Saturn are, because as it relates to the 8th sphere, I think we can also look at Saturn as potentially an instrument, because the ancients had talked about there not being rings around Saturn, and when they're measured, they can be measured as a complete harmonic. Meaning, I think this could be a tool or a device that might be helpful in creating the 8th sphere illusion. If we're going back and quite frankly looking at where Saturn sits, the most material dimension, is it projecting at us the 8th sphere? This is currently kind of where my train of thinking is going with the Voyager spacecraft, more V steganography going past it in the 70s and seeing ships that were making these rings. So Norman Berggren's book, The Ring Makers of Saturn, is all about. And we'll explore that later, but the Lord of the Rings, Saturn, Satan, Sauron was in the Lord of the Rings even with the SN, but the STN is something that we really need to look at in terms of Saturday, the most materialistic of all days, where all of our vices are fulfilled. Saturn's, Satan, Saturnalia, the December 17th holiday that the pagans used to celebrate, the Romans used to celebrate, pre-adopting the Columbian imagery. So this is all related to them hijacking, of course, the number 5, which they've turned upside down in the pentagonal network. But what we're getting at here is what I guess I'll call the holy representation of the pentagon, because this is what the Greeks found. And this is what you see is if you take any equilateral pentagon, it's not called an equilateral pentagon, equidistant, sides of equidistance on a pentagon, maybe is the best way to put it. What you can derive, no matter how large the circumference of the circle that creates it, or the actual measurement tools you use, you can find the rational numbers to be the case as 1, measured in terms of 1 and phi. And all along the outer edges, you get various variations of this with phi plus 1, phi natural, 1 natural, phi squared, and then of course you get the angles, 36 degrees, 108 degrees, and then 72 on the inside. And each arc is measured in increments of 72 degrees along the outside. This is basically where all of the divine harmonics are trapped. And I think if you know how to manipulate these mathematical figures, especially in terms of what the art of war was telling us with manipulating the senses, you start to get what my meaning is on Saturn, maybe hijacking some of this Venus energy, and why Rome is called Venetian, Venice, right? I think it's all part of the plot. So moving on from there, another STN that's going to lead us into our last topics of the day, Stanley Kubrick, STN, and his work in Clockwork Orange, which is a movie about experimental aversion therapy for rehabilitating criminals. And of course, Alex, the main character, got strapped to a chair classically with his eyes clamped open, and he was forced to see all these very sexually charged and violent images, just like the programming that we are inflicted on in the United States. If you notice, something about the V steganography is off here. It's upside down. It's actually LAMBDA. And I think that's part of the riddle here, is what Stanley Kubrick is doing is he's using this energy to basically tell us that this is exactly what they do. they're putting us all under this treatment, and then of course in the psychology of the episode there's some pretty dark parts of this movie, but the main points that relate to our memetics category are that Burgess, the writer of the book, disapproved of this concept of behaviorism, calling the book Beyond Freedom and Dignity one of the most dangerous books ever written, because of the limitations that it put on the behavior modification. So operant conditioning, which is the learning process through which behavior is modified by reinforcement or punishment, came into being. And what do we have today with operant conditioning but rewards of dopamine drips with all of our social media platforms and such? So this has something to do with it as well. I haven't picked this steganography apart a ton with the LAMBDA and Clockwork Orange, but it's an STN connection. So truly, before we get there, there's a document that I wanted to get into that a viewer made me aware of, and it's this document called the Greenland Theory and the Apocalypse Now, and it's all about this controller agenda of this person Minos in Crete, of the Cretans. There's a reason why, and I've known about this for a while, and how maybe the Cretans are involved, and maybe they're the ancient Nephilim giant beings. But their use of the chevron symbol, as we're going to find here, I'm going to zoom in as best I can on this. Maybe now, yeah, here we go. The use of the chevron symbol here, which is LAMBDA, and what that Cretan word is for king, which means, you know, that they're hiding behind this steganography somehow. Okay, so what I'm going to say about this is I'm only going to go through a couple sections as it relates, because I haven't really checked into the validity of a lot of the more wild claims in this, but I did check out at least what I'm going to go into today and fact check what these symbols actually represent, which is all I'm going to reference. But it does get to some interesting places as it relates to this LAMBDA upside down V steganography, what V is truly hiding. So what we're going to get into here is consequently that the chevron symbol adorned the shields of the Greek Spartans who originated on the island of Crete, and Minos was apparently the king god of all of the things on earth. And the Greco-Roman lore, he is noted for the siring of the Lion of Man, being depicted as the devil. Okay, so more to come on this, but if we go down to the Lion of Man, Minos sired the Lion of Man, which in time became the ruling family of Crete. Okay, and then they go into all of these things in scripture, the menorah, which relates to the Merkaba because of the Jewish things in the Star of David, right? Then we go down to Minos and mankind and how it bleeds into the Hindu traditions and the Mahabharata, and how the king Manu might be the same as the king Minos, and it's all talking about the same person in all these epics. And if we're going back to Joseph Farrell's work, which presumes that about 3 million years ago a planet blew up where the asteroid belt was, and that the people of that war got marooned on this planet and subjugated humanity, and even the people from Mars, which atmosphere was blasted, maybe came here for refuge and subjugated us and sired a new genetic line with the genetic manipulation, right? These are things I'm going through very quickly, and not to throw them out, not to explore on them later, but you know, for sake of time here, I'm going to keep going on some of these themes. As it goes down, it goes into the master race. It talks about the devil. This is a 500-something page long document, guys, so there may be something more for me to pick apart here. But when it gets down to the Minos Babylon system, it references the 13-month lunar man calendar, which just like we talked about in The Art of War, there were 13 sections that the Jesuits use. These were immortalized by the Romans. The Jesuits are a Roman practice. And this was popularized by the Mayan calendar, which, of course, came from Atlantis. Okay? So we keep moving down here, and this is where I'm going to go past and actually go into the next section here. In the island of Crete itself, where we're going to start picking apart the LAMBDA symbology, this is where it starts to get curious. The name of Crete and the letters C, K, and Q are represented by the Roman score and by the chevron symbol. So now we have another link for Q to the chevron. Of course, it's turned upside down, with most of our revelations with V for Vendetta. But we have right here, which I looked into. This is actually quite telling that that the lambda symbol is somehow related to Q. All right, and we also have down here that the Cretans were the inventors of fascism. What do we have from last time but our fascist government with the fasces sitting next to it? And of course, here we go, the painting called Apotheosis of Washington, our concept of apotheosis from earlier, right? Putting it right in our face. There's the fascia. Okay. I hope you guys are starting to see how all this might connect. But anyway, the fascist symbols come up in this as well. And then we come down to our last section I'm going to reference here, and it's the cons. And that we're talking about some certain cons because the cons, piracy. We're technically conspiracists. We're pirates. We're attempting to break free of the system, us ourselves. I guess we can identify as this and use this terminology to figure out what the cons really are. The censors, the Roman Republic, the Republic con. Also, Democrat. Interesting. Democrat is rooted in Crete. Democrete. Republic con. So you can clearly see in some of the politics that are being created here and perfected with Machiavelli. Later on, once the Vatican was set up, another con with a V, Vatican City, the U con. We're just looking into the lexicons here of what these words mean to us, and hopefully realizing that this is all part of the mesmerism, the mind control the hypnotism that our magnetic fields are being manipulated, of course, and we got to keep an open mind about this. But anyway. So from there, before this, the 5 and the 6. Before I forgot to implement this in the last chapter. I'm going to go back to Frank Joseph's book, where they talk about the sacred numbers of Atlantis and how they're all going to tie together here. Because the 5 and the 6 were mainly the sacred numbers of Atlantis as well. Within the Holy Trinity, as such, 5 represents humankind, as signified by the 5 senses, 5 fingers of the hand, manual dexterity, solar male energy, light and enlightenment. It stands for consciousness, action, acquisition, material achievement, technology, scientific inquiry, organization, civilization, militarism, conquest, justice, honor, duty, hard facts, self-control, and discernment. Think about what all the things that we went through with the logical fallacies and cognitive biases that we did with those with the flashcards. Those were all the things that Q hijacks from the people that follow him. 5 is the sacred center, symbolized by a circle enclosing a cross or a single point at the center where the imperceptible is perceived or where it manifests. The number 6 connotes female energy. Because it is concerned with lunar cycles, nature, emotion, fecundity, liberty, always represented by a woman, instinct, premonition, creativity, peace, fairness, and forgiveness. So it represents the moon, the 8. If we go back to the representation of the 8th sphere, and see that the moon cycles within it. The moon, of course, I think is a construct in and of itself, a spaceship. It doesn't make any sense that it's there. It's something of a magnetic device that I think is working alongside this etheric 8th sphere with the rings of Saturn to blast at us, to create a harmonic of mind control that grips the Earth grid network, is received by the temple grid structures. The priests are taking their orders from, creating the money to subjugate. But remember, the priests and the politicians, they're all just middle management. To who at the top? I don't know. The wizard's pulling the strings, right? Whoever these STN people are. Maybe it's a collective of beings. All the stuff in the Old Testament with Yahweh being, not really God, but this person, this giant that subjugated, maybe a Cretan himself, that subjugated the Hebrews. 6 is essentially the number of the wife and the mother. What else is it? The bureaus in the United States are forced to either work overtime or multiply their staffs to accommodate an increased number of applicants during 6-year periods. Yeah. So anyway, interesting stuff there. Moving on. Me and my video is going to culminate here in a second, guys. So now that we've got an understanding of the rational irrational ratio, the golden ratio, the temple grids that are taking in the energies from Saturn along the ley line networks, there are studies that are mapping these out. This is, of course, something way different than the Florida Maquis work, but the key, just like the Hierophant card, to understanding this Earth grid. I want to land on something that gets us back to the Stargate and the reverse V steganography in the LAMBDA. This is a Stargate from the series. Florida Maquis talked about this too. But we're going to talk about this and then how gematria relates back and then tie it all back to kind of really drive home why Q is this Psyop, guys. But this is going to be another video game that we're going to get back into. This is an older one, Half-Life, but because I realized when LAMBDA ended up being the reverse of the V steganography, there was a lowercase lambda that took up the Half-Life logo, which was this story about a guy named Gordon Freeman who had this, who existed in, who had to come into a military campaign to sanction off a portal that had opened up a demonic realm on a different planet, essentially. And this is Gordon Freeman right here. You might notice the terminology Freeman in this game too, free man. And this is where it comes into the part of the next part that we're going to wrap up to, the native of Seattle, Washington. He ends up being somebody who's a quantum mechanics. He's into quantum mechanics and relativity. And his earliest heroes are Albert Einstein, Stephen Hawking, and Richard Feynman, all of which have been proven in one way or another, as Nikola Tesla might call them, fuzzy-haired crackpots. He really did call Einstein that, but if he were alive long enough, he would have called Stephen Hawking that. And even though I like Richard Feynman a lot, and you know, his I don't think his works are overall bad. He doesn't include metaphysics into anything he's done. So right there's something that they're trying to hide from you too. But the Black Mesa research facility is where he has to go into this classified decontamination mission of the facility. And what he finds out is that in going through, I'm actually just going to read you guys the story arc. In the original Half-Life, Gurman Freeman was in a section of Black Mesa dedicated to the teleport research, which is also called the LAMBDA complex, and is identifiable by the LAMBDA logo. And what I was just talking about there was that the whole point of the research facility that had these monsters spawning out of it that he had to come in and essentially decontaminate was that they were coming from a different dimension, from a Stargate of sorts, a portal that had been opened up by this machine. A lot of people have tied this stuff to CERN, and I think in the past, I don't know if CERN has anything to do with it. CERN has, of course, the 666 steganography with it as well. So it may be the capture device for Saturn, right? If CERN technically ends up being the capture device for the energies that are being blasted out from Saturn of some sort, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with this type of a story too. Just spitballing here. But I did find it very curious just on the surface because, and again, it's another video game. I'll have to maybe go back and replay this to figure out some of the more deep mysteries involved here with the LAMBDA steganography. But what ends up happening in Half-Life 2 is that it's a dystopian society. And now Gordon Freeman is leading the resistance again because he finds out the truth with, the government black ops agents psionically connecting with him. There's the concept of the G man, the government man, but also, as we know, G as the main number of Freemasonry and I guess I don't have that one pulled out. I'm just going to pull up the 5G, the 5G photo that I had up. But either way, we'll get into this maybe in the future. But what is even more curious is that the steganography continues because there's a portal gun that is part of this series. This portal device that's made by this other science lab, not Black Mesa, but Aperture Science, that has a whole nother video game arc that's made by the same company, Valve. The Valve Corporation, more V's, right? And this is something that's very interesting because it does relate to pentagonal networks, creating the ability to go through a Stargate, which is essentially what the portal is in this video game. And then also, as it relates to the Valve Steganography, it being the publisher and developer of these two video games, I looked a little bit deeper in to see what that might be trying to hide. And a couple interesting things popped up when I was reading through the definition of what valves are, right? And the valve is a lid or a plug or a cover applied to an aperture so that by its movement, as by swinging, lifting, and falling, sliding, turning, or the like, it will open or close the aperture to permit or prevent passage of fluid. And this relates to all sorts of different instruments. It relates to musical instruments. The valve inside of a trumpet, let's say, it could create a different harmonic, right? So a valve is something that can create a different harmonic based on the analog movement of it. And then down here, in another definition of a valve being used in a practical aspect was that valve metal arcs, especially in the mercury arc, which was something that interested me because of the word mercury. So what I did was I looked a little bit further into that. I got some more imagery for valve, the valve in the back of the head, controlling the mind, right? A valve shutoff switch for the mind, or control down here, the classic one, controlling what you see. And the use of the lambda, which is also used in particle physics. So there's something going on with the controlling of portals and teleportation devices in this Half-Life video game. And it also relates to measuring consistent radioactivity with Half-Life, which is, again, why I think the lowercase lambda was also used as the steganography for the game. But it's interesting that NATO military operations use the chevron opposite or inverted V as painted on their vehicles for the military alliance for identification. I found that to be interesting too. But here's the mercury arc valve that I was talking about with this last deal. So here we get the mercury arc valve. A mercury arc valve, or mercury vapor rectifier, is a type of electrical rectifier used for converting high voltage or high current alternating AC into direct current. So what I'm interpreting from this, guys, is we've got a certain type of frequency being valved into the mind, being controlled into the mind, and through transduction, using a device that converts energy from one form to another, which is the video game that you're playing, a mercury arc valve is created, turning something of an alternating current into direct current, or DC. Where have we seen DC before? DC Parasite network, I suppose, right? I don't know if you guys are starting to laugh at this stuff as I am. It's just too interesting to say the least. But guys, I want to leave everybody with, again, some hope at the end of this video, because it's a little bit much to stomach. But I will tell you how I busted through all this, because in the practice of this, there's somewhat of a decoding mechanism you can use. And Zach Hubbard's work is who I'm going to reference from the blog freetofindtruth.com. And it was through him and looking into ley lines in the first place that I started to decode what was actually happening and give us some tools against this. So here's where it all factors in. So this is a calculator called the Gematrinator. It calculates gematria, which is the practice of infusing letters into numbers. If we write down the word Q, like we've been looking into, we find some curious things. It's the 17th letter in the alphabet. That's all that means. Full reduction means that we use the rules of numerology, where we combine these two terms to equal 8. 8chan, 17th letter in the English alphabet, we have our winners, right, for the steganography. If we're looking at V, just for, I don't see anything necessarily with V, but we do have 5 and 5, of course, right? So taking that practice further, kind of some interesting stuff. I've showed you guys what Zach Hubbard always does, judge, and the judge's tool, gavel. Exactly the same numerology, 47, 20, 88, 25 for both. you have witch, you have broom. Same thing. So you see how they code these numbers into spells, into letters and numbers. It's not actually too hard to decode when you know what you're doing. But one of the concepts from earlier in the video, when we're looking at the divine ratios here, phi, we have 108 degrees, we have 36 degrees that make up the divine triangle. Well, what happens when we type in geometry to the Gematrinator? Something interesting. 108, 108, 36, 36, 36 degrees and 108 degrees. It goes on, guys. MLB. And Major League Baseball. You get some curious things. There are 27 outs in a game, 9 innings, 18 total slides for the innings. I think 54 is the total amount of outs for both sides, right? And then you also have 162 games in a Major League Baseball season. This goes on and on and on and on and on. And Zach's channel is where I'll reference you guys to really get a hang on this, because this is probably the blog I'm going to link, because it shows the significance of 113 and how 113, if it's factored into any news story, any sports headline, anything with Q, you're going to have all of this end up being something of a consistent theme throughout those types of articles. If you notice, they all equal 113. So 113 equals bullshit is on here too. Essentially equals bullshit. And through this code and some curious digging for myself, I was starting to piece together the things that in my reality might not be so consistent with what the truth was. The Seahawks kept getting this 21 and 12 in my mind. In fact, I was a Seahawks fan all the way up until this play in the Super Bowl. And this is really one of the turning points for when I woke up to the control network that really does exist on the world, because I was noticing after this play was over, I just couldn't believe it. How could they not run Marshawn Lynch into the end zone and all that crap? But upon further examination, I saw a lot of 12 and 21, and I wondered why that was, because we have 2nd and 1 yard to go. And as the play plays out, of course, Russell Wilson takes the pass. And it's intercepted by number 21, Malcolm Butler, to end the game. And the play ends with 21 seconds on the clock, too. I'll have you see. So I'll shoot once he's down, right there. 21 seconds left on the clock. Another 21. Upon further examination, when you go look at the Seahawks statistics and you look at Russell Wilson in particular, that incomplete interception made him 12 for 21 on the day with 2 interceptions and 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Right? So this continued when I started to go to the Gematrinator, and I started to look into things like fan, the 12th man, right? Is it the 12th man? I saw something. I don't know if it's. I think it was just the number 12. But just like, put it up there again, fan. The 12th man and the number 12 is in the back of the 12 jerseys say fan on them. You see how the riddle is quite clearly put in here. And of course, with Gordon Freeman being from Seattle, this all happening when the Q stuff started to unfold, and once the Seattle stuff started to kick in, I think that's when I really started to wake up, because I'd already figured out, okay, through Zach Hubbard's work, this is how they're controlling the media. This is how they control timestamps. This is how they control drops. So a news story is no different from a Q drop in this respect, because they're using these encoded letters and numbers to create a narrative and manipulate the minds of people through gematria. And I think Zach is one of the brightest minds there is about memorizing all of these. He wrote a book called Letters and Numbers, which I recommend everybody pick up for about $5. But this is literally how, as time goes along, you figure out, 1221. They've tied the 1221 riddle into the Morning Phase, Beck's Grammy-winning album, and how it's 47 minutes in length. Seattle sits on the 47th parallel, right? It's his 12th studio album. So they put all these little clues into the news leading up to, as Zach proves, and then they also use previous Super Bowls and such to code into this. And the number 33, and the fact that the Super Bowl that they lost to the Patriots with this play was on the 33rd parallel down in Phoenix, right? And so it's all started with this Richard Sherman riddle, okay? And then you move along. Here's the deal with the 33rd parallel. Glendale, Arizona, 144 in simple gematria. Seahawks were 14-4 going in. Patriots were 14-4. 12 times 12 equals 144. 12th man, right? It's the 12th Fibonacci number. The Seahawks were a ritual for this whole deal. And I hope I'm going through this slowly enough for people to just kind of pick up on the beats, because Zach's work is what you really need to be paying attention to here. But as time goes along, they even put in these stories where Malcolm Butler, the guy who intercepted it, says, I was at practice and the scout team ran the same exact play. Butler told Dan Patrick, and I got a beat on it at practice because I gave ground. Bill Belichick, he came out and said to me, Malcolm, you've got to be on that. So they're telling him exactly the play that's going to be run here. And why do you think they call it practice? Why do you think they call it a play? It's athletic theater. That's all it is. It's no different from the WWF. And I remember just the same time when the WWF in the 90s was being fought against all my friends who thought that this was, definitely the truth. They had to come to terms with it. I think that's what we're going to have to do with football sometime soon. But of course, guys, this is all to say I'm going to close this video out and relate it back to the Q proofs and say this is literally what is happening in my current understanding. I shouldn't say this is literal. This is currently the train of thought that I favor. Of course, my mind is open to be changed at any point, but the evidence is damning for whatever direction we're heading in toward here in this mind control meme that we're taking apart. I really hope that this does give some people hope, because what we're figuring out here with the fact that we're looking at ley lines and energy grid networks, the fact that the stadiums themselves, as is evidenced through the London, this is the London overlay of the city, and how stadiums are put on specific ley lines to play out narratives, the memetics that happen with the archetypes of the teams and the numbers involved on their jerseys. This is all a spell that plays out and inflicts us into subjugation to believe it's some random result. It's anything but. Vegas always wins, guys, and there's another V for you right at the end of the day. They've hijacked your vagus nerve and addicted you to Vegas. The next videos, as you guys know, I'll be doing a Edgar Casey video, but I'm also going to go into the concept of Batman and DC comics, as it might be relating to the DC Parasite network, the Caped Crusader, of course, the Templars and their crusade, and all the Catholic symbolism that's in Batman. There's actually a series that is written by Jeff Loebs and Tim Saleh. We're going to go into the occult holidays and the Calendar Man from the Long Halloween and this particular one, and see what that has to offer us. But it's all going to relate back to the Exo-Vatican books and the Petrus Romanus. See how Rome all plays into the Catholic structure of the Batman books. But expect a video from me soon on the Edgar Casey story of Jesus, guys, because I think we now need to expand on what Venus means to all that, and give ourselves the most empowerment we possibly can. Big shout out again to everybody who's continuing to watch this work and enjoy it. I hope this has been helpful thus far. Like, share, subscribe, comment in the section for what you may or may not agree with, and let's keep this train rolling. Thanks, guys.